welcome to Movie Joust. My name is Jesse Nussman, a film critic living here in Atlanta, Georgia. And with me on the other line, fresh from the shower, it's Jason Evans and Josh Sewell.
How do I look?
I don't know. That's for YouTube to decide.
Yeah,
exactly.
To be accurate, that's all Jason. I chose coffee and ball cap instead.
I'm nursing a small hangover, so it was just throw on a sweatshirt and put my head under the sink. So
Hey,
there
you go.
The reality is, ordinarily I wouldn't care, but it had been a couple days. I've just had the NCAA tournament's going on. I've been really busy. My dog is not doing well, and as a result, I have not showered in a couple days.
You've just been lounging in those sweats, just like sitting there, like watching like one Duke game after another.
Exactly. Yes, that has pretty much been what's been going on. So I went, you know what? If I'm going to appear on camera, this hair's a little too greasy.
I've been meaning to ask you, Jason. I don't know if you watch White Lotus, but there's a Duke Chapel Hill family that is at the center of this season, and as someone who grew up in North Carolina, it is just like the most like chef's kiss, like accurate portrayal of like what that those kind of like split families are like.
So first of all, I should say, I watched about 2/3 of the first episode of this season of White Lotus. I have it on the back burner. My wife and I are going to watch it when it's all done, and we can just binge it all the way through. I don't usually do that. Like if a show comes out, periodically, I just follow along. But we've just been super busy and watching Severance and a few other shows. But I'm aware of the Duke UNC family, and I come from a Duke UNC family. Most of my family are Carolina fans or went to UNC, and then I'm the Dookie. And when I saw that the confident, powerful, super successful guy and his son were from Duke, and the sort of quieter, not quite as much UNC part of the family, I was like, okay, yeah, this is accurate.
I will be curious what you think about that accuracy as the series goes on. And
yeah, I've heard they turn into kind of bad individuals. I have plenty of classmates that I go, yeah, that's them.
For White Lotus.
Yeah, I was going to say, surely not on White Lotus do the people turn bad.
Yeah.
Who'd have thunk it?
So guys, this week we're going to kind of do a bit of a grab bag episode, have some topics for us to discuss. But first, the big movie of the weekend is Disney's live action remake of Snow White, the most canceled movie online. A movie that only Jason has seen, because Josh and I bowed out of going to see it. Jason, I don't know if you have any hot takes about Snow White. Maybe it's a secret masterpiece. I got from when we went to Warfare the other night that you did not seem that thrilled about Snow White, but I'm gonna give you a couple minutes to spitball, and then I wanna propose a question that I've been ruminating on all week.
That sounds good. I would say that Snow White is perfectly competent. It's not. I mean, like as these Disney animation to live action remakes go, it's in the top half. There have been some that have been absolute disasters, in my opinion. That said, I'm sort of like, why? What's the point? I don't know what we're doing with this film. There is a lot of it that is new. The story has been updated. I mean, it's not just a story of a beautiful woman who can't do anything by herself and needs a prince and folks to help her out. Rachel Zegler is the highlight of the film. There's no question about that. Her voice is great. All her songs are pretty good. So the film's been updated. There's some new songs, but I don't know why this film exists. It's clearly aimed at younger kids. Like a lot of the action, a lot of the characters are so paper thin that you're like, okay, this is for a 6-year-old and 8-year-old. Mm-hmm. This is not for even like a 12, 13-year-old, and certainly not for adults. I thought the film, my hottest take is, so Disney supposedly spent $270 million, something like that on it. How did they spend that much money? First of all, it doesn't look that great. It looks fine. It doesn't look that great. I know that Disney's like, oh, it's real, it's live action as opposed to animated, but frankly, almost everything in it other than the human beings looks animated, looks computer generated. Like they were standing on green sets for the most part.
This is an Alice in Wonderland situation.
Yeah, so frankly, I mean, like, it's the idea of taking something animated and making it real life doesn't exist in this movie. But then the other thing is, so if you're going to spend $250+ million on this film, Disney, how about you pay for some star power on screen? Because other than Rachel Zegler, West Side Story, she's not a huge name, but she's great. Gal Gadot, who is Wonder Woman, but who is not great in this film. There's no one else recognizable in the cast. And there are a number of like side characters that would have been ideal for a somewhat famous comedian, to inject a little bit of humor into the film.
You want Bill Burr to play Dopey is what you want.
I mean, who doesn't want Bill Burr to play Dopey? No, there's a huntsman character. There's a captain of the guard for the queen. There's the king. I mean, there are all these little characters who, if you'd put someone with a little more charisma, a little more star power in that role, and I'm not talking about spend $10 million, to get Pierce Brosnan or something to come in and do it. I'm talking, you spent $250 million, spend $250,000 for someone to come in and shoot for 2 days, because these are not big roles. I don't understand why Disney didn't do this.
As we're going to discuss in just a little bit, there are plenty of actors available who will say yes to anything for about 3 days of shooting.
That is true. That is true. A lot of people looking to get that extra Porsche, maybe put that third kid through college, buy that patio for their summer home.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the bottom line is it's just not. It's a film where I don't know why it's there. And the other thing I would say about it is this: Snow White. Like, is Snow White still a big, relevant, the kids need to see Snow White? I get when you remake The Lion King. I get when you remake Moana. These are titles that are, like, consistently among the most popular titles on Disney+. Snow White just doesn't, I mean, like, when was the last time a little kid was like, ooh, I need to watch Snow White over and over and over? It's not relevant anymore.
Fascinating conversation you and I had the other day, because I was mentioning, like, I probably saw the original Disney Snow White once as a child. It scared me, and then it was just like, it was not one of the ones that was on rotation growing up. Like, it was much more like the Renaissance stuff, like Little Mermaid and Aladdin and Lion King. Like, I don't even think we had a copy of Snow White on VHS growing up at all.
Yeah, Josh, you've got kids. You would remember this. I mean, is Snow White something that mattered to you guys?
Snow White was never really in the rotation for us either. Back in the quarantine days, one of the only sort of faint silver linings to that cloud was I got to, like, I say entertain, my daughter said torture her with, like, sort of nightly film festivals, because none of us had school. So she kind of got to go through our physical media library, and we started with the obvious ones, the Disney animated stuff. And I didn't try to do the overbearing dad thing about, like, we're watching this. I'm like, just go upstairs, pick something, we'll watch whatever you want to watch. Snow White never came into the conversation. I was like, you want to do the Disney princess things? And we did Brave, we did Little Mermaid. Snow White never came up. And so I think it's a situation where it's one of those movies that, yes, obviously we respect it, we admire it because of what it represents to, animation as a whole and the film industry as a whole. But as far as aging well, yeah, it's 75 minutes, and I would argue that's about a half hour too long.
Well, so, and we're seeing. I was gonna say we're seeing the impact, the result of all this in the box office numbers. It's going to do 40-something million, they say, this weekend, which is fine. That's a decent number. I mean, box office has been terrible. We can't get even $10 million at box office for a great film like Black Bag. So on the one hand, hey, Snow White doing 40 million, great, but 40 million against a budget north of 250. Disney's losing money on this, a lot of money.
Well, I don't know. We said the same thing about Mufasa, because it started small and kind of hung in there. But Mufasa didn't have Minecraft movie opening up in a couple of weeks. And I don't know about the quality of the Minecraft movie, but if you're just looking for stuff that parents can get the kids out of the house to see, that they recognize the name, that's at least one big weekend taken away.
Yeah. So
word of mouth may kill that one later, but
I mean, do the children care? I mean, I guess if the word's getting around on the playground, like, yeah, the Minecraft movie sucks, but like
The word on the playground.
yeah. As we all know, children, great barometers of artistic quality.
So this I'm glad you brought that up. This brings me to a hot take I had. I've been stewing on this. I even kind of like, dipped it into the waters of TikTok just to see what the people were thinking, and a lot of the comments I got back were shut the F up. But
Not on TikTok.
not
what?
on TikTok. But you know what? I'm just gonna come out and say it. We got way too many like grown ass adults getting way too upset about children's movies. Like we're film critics, so like we needed to
100%.
touch on the Snow White thing. But it's wild to me that there is so much like cultural baggage and importance that we're putting on a live action Snow White movie, and the fact that like my algorithm keeps feeding me people that are like, everyone at the YouTube channel for the content, they're like, we got to go see Snow White, and we got people that are complaining where like, does Rachel Zegler understand the importance and the responsibility of the Snow White story? And me being like, you're an adult. Go see the Bong Joon-ho movie. Like, I don't. You know what I watched this past weekend? I rented the new Paul Schrader movie, which wasn't great, but I would be a way more interesting conversation than like talking about Snow White with like three other dudes. Like, I'm just a little like, how broken are we as a culture where like, we adults are needing to get stuff out of children's movies, and like, it kind of gets to the Marvel thing a little bit that we talked about a few weeks ago, where it's like Captain America 4 doesn't need to be a political thriller. If you're gonna do that, go see an actual political thriller. But I don't know.
Yeah,
what
so
what
my
are you
response,
guys thinking?
My response would be, yeah, I agree with you. The controversy, is Rachel Zegler's skin the right color to play Snow White? Is it politically correct for us to have human beings play dwarfs, or should they be computer generated? And all the other, there's controversy about Gal Gadot's political stuff because she's from Israel and is a strong supporter of Israel. None of that. Frankly, when I talked about the movie with you guys, didn't mention any of that stuff.
Yeah.
None of that matters to my review.
Yeah.
None of that matters to my enjoyment of the film. None of that matters to whether or not I would tell people to bother to go see the film. Sure, I guess there's some actors who do things where you go, you need to not see their films because they are a problematic individual.
Yes.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a Woody Allen film. It's been a long time since I saw a Woody Allen film, but I don't think it's part of the conversation here because people want to make it part of the conversation, not because it should be part of the conversation.
Yeah, that's just my thing, is it being baffling to me that like the thing people want to have, like, we talked about Mickey 17 and like our various different opinions on it, but like it's wild in this like a month removed from a like Bong Joon-ho movie that essentially is like a MAGA satire, that like the most politically charged movie in America is like a Disney movie, and like that to me of like whatever you're thinking is like
aimed at 8-year-olds.
right, is like
Yeah.
is our culture broken of like we need to grow up and like start arguing about like adult stuff, even if it's frivolous adult stuff.
Yeah, well, A, 100%. Totally agree. B, just for the sake of conversation, like, not to be fair it, but this is what happens when you treat every mega budget movie as a 4-quadrant blockbuster.
Yes.
When it has to appeal to literally every moviegoer, that's you inviting, hey, 40-year-old man, give me your opinion on Snow White. It's like, no, as a 43-year-old man, we don't need that.
Yeah.
We don't need your opinion on Snow White. You don't need my opinion on Snow White. I will be happy to talk about it.
We've
But
eventized like I think Disney being kind of like the chief box office, juggernaut for like the last, for most of the 2010s, because I feel like it kind of has like fumbled a little bit in the last few years, and they've had some huge bombs. But like,
well, in fairness, they purchased Star Wars, they purchased Marvel,
Yeah.
they purchased Pixar. They basically bought their way to being the biggest.
right.
Yeah.
And so them being the biggest means like that's got the most marketing power, and so that becomes like, I don't know, this weird thing of like the for lack of a better word, what we would think of as children's movies. I don't mean that like derogatory, but like that has become the center of culture, and now we have this weird reaction culture on top of that, where it is like, we can get into like the people online being like, when am I going to get the R-rated Spider-Man movie that's going to have boobs and violence in it for the adults? Be like, why do you want that? Why do you want that?
Well,
go see an adult movie.
So the other thing I would say, just really, really quickly, and then we can move on, because I know, Jesse, you got some other topics we want to hit. I here's a hot take for you. Pixar ruined traditional animated films, and by that I mean when we got Toy Story, Monsters Inc., Finding Nemo, Ratatouille, The Incredibles. These were animated films that Josh's little kids and my little kids loved. And you know what? I loved them too, because they found a magic formula to be able to appeal to a 6-year-old and a 60-year-old at the same time. And that ain't easy to do.
No.
And so now we expect all our kids' movies, all our animated blockbusters to do the same thing. And it's a really hard needle to thread. And Pixar managed to do it for like 8 or 10 movies in a row, and we
Right.
just were unbelievable.
They couldn't even keep up the run of that, of like,
Yeah.
it's that hard.
But it's also it's a run that expanded over multiple generations, so that people like me who saw these as a teenager could show them to my kids, and it made us think that's the standard. And as the guy who's sort of in the middle of the age range here, I find it very hard to believe, I guess, Jason, you can correct me if I'm wrong, where there are people in the 80s going, I really need to know what Pauline Kael thinks of The Land Before Time.
Yeah, or
You know,
like,
no.
No. Like, damn, Roger Ebert has a review of Oliver and Company. I got to be sure to watch that.
Yeah. Nobody cared.
Josh, that may have been the greatest sentence you've ever uttered.
That's a soundbite. That's we're trimming that out and making that the intro.
It's just, but, you can see how, and this is something I try to harp on to my students to know success all the time, is that, like, you don't, like, all of us live in a bubble that the world has always been the way it is for us all the time. And I have to tell them, no, it's not. And so we think like, oh, this is how people have always thought about kids' movies. No, we're just weird.
Well, the other thing is The Land Before Time didn't cost $250 million.
And it wasn't a 4-quadrant movie. Everybody said,
Right.
this is for children.
But when is Universal doing the live action remake that's going to tie into the Jurassic World
Be quiet.
franchise?
Don't put that into the, do not put that into the universe. Don't do it.
All right, guys. I have some other headlines that have come out this past week that I want to get your thoughts on. One of the first things I want to bring up is we had this big shakeup this past week with Warner Brothers slate of movies for this year, which, weirdly enough, kind of tying into what we're talking about, is mostly original movies. I think like the only real franchise movie that's in there is Superman, but they have Sinners, the Michael B. Jordan, Ryan Coogler 1920s vampire movie that's still on the calendar for next month, I believe. There's the Paul Thomas Anderson movie, which it sounds like is a big budget action movie with Leonardo DiCaprio in it that is coming out in September. There's Zach Kreger's new movie. Can you guys remember the name of it? I know it's got Josh Brolin in it. It's definitely not Warfare, but it's something similar to that because
Weapons,
yes. That's coming out in
yeah.
August. So this is the guy that made Barbarian, kind of doing his kind of big follow-up. And then we were going to have in the fall Maggie Gyllenhaal's super expensive 1930s punk musical gangster movie readaptation of The Bride of Frankenstein with Jesse Buckley and Christian Bale in it, though that got delayed to next year. I just want to see what are you guys' thoughts on, like, I'm a little worried we're going to get into this dumb hand-wringing thing again within a year where, like, you know, I want to believe that people are going to show up for original movies, but it sounds like this has already maybe begun a little bit with the Bong Joon-ho movie not doing so well. Of people, you know, we hear on one side of the aisle people saying, like, we want original movies. Where are the original movies? Why can't they make them like they used to? But then now we have a big studio that's like pushing those out for this year. And then now the hand-wringing has already begun of, like, did Warner Brothers make a mistake? And this is going to be a disastrous year for them because who's going to come out for these movies? I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts on this?
My first thought is what matters is not, is it original? What matters is it a quality film? Is it a good movie? And so what troubles me is, you know, to some extent Mickey 17, but what troubles me is Black Bag.
Yeah.
And the fact that Black Bag, which cost around $50 or $60 million, a very reasonable budget, is fairly likely to lose money unless it really takes off on premium video on demand. You know, if
which it very well could.
Yeah, I mean, that's happened with movies like, I think recently, like that happened with The Northman, that happened with Saltburn. You know, movies that maybe like a few months later, then people are like, oh, I don't know where this came from. I somehow missed this in the theater.
Yeah, well, Nora got a big PVOD boost once the award season kicked in. I know it's on Hulu now, but, you know, rentals for that, I think we're really close to theatrical box office.
Yeah, but at the same time, having a communal experience and seeing it in a theater with a bunch of other people where when you laugh, there are dozens of other people laughing along with you, and when you gasp, you know, you notice the people around you gasping as well. That's going to a movie. Mm-hmm. So that bothers me more than just being like, oh, people won't see adult films, original films. I think the problem that Warner has is a lot of these films look like they are stinkers. Like if you tell me a movie that's 85, 90% on Rotten Tomatoes and has a Metacritic score in the 70s is failing at the box office, I'm bothered by it. If you tell me that it's a movie that's barely fresh, where a lot of critics are like, then I don't know if that's a problem at the movies or a problem with the audience. That's a problem with Warner Brothers and the fact that they're mostly producing films that, frankly, they don't know how to market, that they don't, know what the audience is for them, and where I'm not sure who at Warner Brothers creatively approved of this project. I mean, the Alto Nights, they didn't even screen for critics.
Oh, that's
well,
right.
That's what I was just about to bring that up. I was going to say, like, they explicitly mentioned in the stuff I read, that is the one project that David Zaslav personally put his thumb on the scale and said, these are the kind of movies we need to be making. And you see what happened there.
Well, and it sounds like, the sort of producer regime that sort of greenlit a lot of this stuff is now being pushed out at Warner Brothers. And
I wonder why.
Well, and it also, it kind of
They're literally burning money. They're quite literally setting money on fire with some of these films.
Yeah, and it gets to, I think you bringing up the marketing thing, like, it is a little baffling to me of, like, there are great people like A24 can, like, I think the brilliance of, like, a company like that is in the marketing more than even, like, the quality of the films that they're going through. Is, like, they've somehow figured out a very online way to tap into a, like, movie-obsessed faction of the culture and market kind of unusual stuff as, like, a cool alternative. And it just sort of baffles me that, like, a studio as big as Warner Brothers, the sense that I'm getting, and that you kind of put your finger on, Jason, is kind of like big studios that are just sort of used to, like, hey, like, not to throw the James Gunn Superman movie under the bus, but that's sort of like the one example. I'm looking forward to it. But, like, Superman is easy to sell. People know what Superman is, but, like, have the mainstream studios lost a certain talent for, like, I remember talking when we did the Mickey 17 episode of being like, the marketing for that movie is just baffling. And like, it just sort of screams like, we don't know what to do with this. And I don't know, it makes me a little bit worried of like, I'm so excited for the Paul Thomas Anderson movie. I'm excited for, you know, the guy who made Barbarian, his follow-up and whatever that's going to be. You know, it just sort of worries me that we have the potential for maybe some like really cool original movies, and that are being released by a big studio, but that the big studios don't even seem to know how to market original movies to people anymore. And that's just sort of baffling to me.
I think a lot of this comes down to, you know, this death of a monoculture. This idea that like there was a time when if you want to see a movie, there was one venue to see a movie, and that was you went to a movie. And you know, now, you know, not to defend Warner Brothers marketing at all, but you know, for one movie you've got to have 4,000 different marketing strategies. It's like, okay, well, how do we, it can't just be like, well, let's put trailers on the 3 networks anymore. You know, it's got to be, okay, well, how are we going to market this to the Nickelodeon kids? How are we going to market this to the TikTok kids? How are we going to market this to people who aren't on social media and they're on, you know, how do we put this on your racist uncle's Facebook page? You know, like everybody has their own sort of like mini strategy for the same movie. So you end up selling 27 different versions of the same movie. There's no way to please all of those people and also make them think they're going to see the same film. So you're going to disappoint somebody, and the word of mouth is going to kick in with that.
Well, and this is we've made it sound like this is a Warner Brothers problem. This is not just a Warner Brothers problem. No. And in fact, I am terrified that the $300 million Joe Kosinski film F1, the Formula One racing film with Brad Pitt in it, which for the $300 million for that, almost all of it comes from Apple. When that bombs, and I think it is going to bomb.
Really?
By the way, with a $300 million budget, like
I guess that's true. That needs to be like a huge Top Gun Maverick level phenomenon to make back.
Yeah, and look, money. I love Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt has never had the star power of Tom Cruise. Never.
No. Yeah.
So I don't. You know, bomb is the wrong word. If that film doesn't make 150 million domestic, and I don't think it will, is Apple going to get out of the movie business, or at least the big budget movie business? There's a very real chance of that, and we're seeing more and more consolidation in the industry. Maybe you know. Maybe it's okay if we can still make films for 30, 40, 50, 60 million dollars. That's probably going to be okay.
Yeah.
But I think if you want to make a film for 150 million plus, there are going to be very, very limited options. Like it's going to be Disney, maybe Warner if you're like a DC movie, you know, Universal if you're a Jurassic movie, but not a lot else.
Well, I mean, this kind of I think ties a little bit into, so like Josh and I saw the electric
Jesse, your dog is almost on your shoulder.
Your dog has strong opinions about film.
You want to talk about the Electric State? You way more opinions on it than I did. Yeah, so Josh and I watched the Electric State, which, like, speaking of really expensive movies, I mean, like, that's one that like costs like over $300 million allegedly.
320.
And you know, I just sort of sat through it. Like, I don't know if you have any more like specific takes on it, Josh. Like I was telling Jason the other night, I just sort of found it boring. Like I started doing chores in the middle of watching it because I was cleaning my floors because it was just that much of a dull slog of a movie. But like, I do think we're sort of getting into the stage of there was that like keynote address from like all the way back in like 2012, 2013 of Spielberg and Lucas being like, guys, this is unsustainable. We can't be making like 8 or 9 like $200 to $300 million movies a year. Like eventually the well is going to run dry and stuff is going to be crashing on itself. And, you know, it got last year.
We're there.
Yeah. Last year got me thinking, you know, there was stuff like Challengers or Civil War or The Substance that had, you know, something like Civil War. That's a bigger budget movie for A24, but is fairly mid-budget by like most Hollywood standards. And it just like those movies were hits to the ratio of like how much they cost. And it just had me thinking about like
should have been bigger hits. Should have been bigger hits.
Yeah,
More
yeah,
people
yeah.
should have seen all those movies.
But I don't think any of those studios are like, feel like those were failures because they were at least profitable. And this idea of, it's the Blumhouse model. It's like if you don't spend that much on this, you can maybe take a little bit more risks, and then you're not going to be, it doesn't have to be the like super expensive Snow White movie that needs to also be a 4-quadrant blockbuster like what Josh says, because that needs to justify the price tag for it. And then you have something like The Electric State, which just feels like money being like thrown at the screen, but to nothing. Like
no effect.
It just to no effect. It just sort of looks like an expensive movie that has like a lot of people that it must have cost a lot of money to bring together and a lot of expensive effects, but like it's just sort of living in the void of Netflix, and it just sort of feels so, I don't know, kind of like we're just going through the motions and it's just gonna exist as like wallpaper in the background. And like that feels unsustainable to me, and that feels like that's just going to further erode movie culture even more, is like the idea of let's build several $100 million blockbusters that need to speak to everyone. Let's, Josh, you brought up the world's getting more niche. Let's have movie culture get, find different movies for different kinds of people, and they don't need to cost that much.
Yeah, to kind of tie together a few of the conversations we've kind of been having at the same time, like if The Electric State, if Snow White is the future of blockbuster filmmaking, let it burn, man. Like if this is what we're trying to justify, I don't want to, and I don't mean to sound like a Scrooge, but like if we're all saying that studios need to find a new model, this one needs to die, because they're going to keep putting money towards things that work. And as long as it is even half-heartedly working, where they can put, they're like, well, why should we work hard enough to make $10-30 million movies when we can make just as much money by working hard once? That's not art. And, and I know that we're talking about studios and budgets and what's going to happen. And I get that. There is the business side of the conversation. It's a conversation I've always found tedious and boring. Like, if a movie does well, who's happy? Shareholders, the actors who have points on a studio. Like, if a movie tanks, who's sad? If I saw a movie and I loved it, but it tanked, it affects me in no way whatsoever. I still get to love the movie that tanked. And when we talk about the existence of a movie's life forever, how much of that movie's life is the theatrical experience? It's now 8 weeks.
Yeah, how
for
many movies?
8 weeks
8
of this
weeks.
Yeah.
Black Bag's going to be
at
on
most.
Yeah.
And so if we're talking about films as a piece of art that is going to exist forever, who cares about money? I know people do care about money. It's not my job to care about money. So I'm going to talk about but I know also if these movies we love keep tanking, they're not going to make those movies anymore. So you do have to consider some of the financial aspects.
I mean, it's a matter of whether or not the films get made. And the other thing I will say is this. So you mentioned Blumhouse. M. Night Shyamalan has been making budget movies.
Yeah. He's
been financing them himself, like each movie finances the next one, so to speak. And it came time for him to make Glass, the third film in that trilogy that started with Unbreakable, which is, arguably, I don't know, top 2-3 of his films ever made. And Glass, because he had to make it on a cheap budget, really suffers. The story that he had to do was a cheap budget story, and it's a very unsatisfying ending of those characters' stories.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Because he didn't have the money to make a little more ambitious story that was fitting of who these characters were and the journey that we'd taken with them. So we need to consider the fact that to get the story we want on film costs money.
Yeah.
And sometimes it costs, more money than then the budget might, then the box office might justify otherwise. So, yeah, I mean, it's an impossible game to play. The studios are in a very, very difficult position of feeling like I can't make $1 billion blockbuster unless I spend $250 million, and then I've spent $250 million and it stinks, and I've flushed $250 million down the drain.
Yeah,
which is to bring us back to
sorry, and at the same time, Netflix is spending $320 million on a film that sucks and doesn't care because Netflix has so much money that it doesn't matter.
That's what I was going to say is it would be one thing if they were spending $320 million on somebody's passion project. That this was something that a lot of people were like, okay, I know Netflix has issues. This is the only way this is going to get made. Like The Irishman.
Like the terrible Zack Snyder films.
Yeah.
Those awful. He at least really cared about those. They are awful,
right.
But he really cared about those.
Yeah.
I don't even remember what they were called. What was that?
But for something like The Electric State, this was one of 10 things that the Russos had in the hopper. Now they have a budget where they can actually cast real movie stars instead of whoever, Zack Snyder had to pull from. But the result of this is stuff we've seen a million times before, way better. This is 80s Amblin Spielberg with some Ready Player One thrown in, without all that messy subtext and things they want to say, because which is the point of a film.
Yeah.
You've got Chris Pratt playing a character who, if you put a gun to my head and told me to close my eyes and tell me if this piece of dialogue came from the dude he played in this movie, Star-Lord, or the Dino Wrangler from Jurassic Park, I'm going to tell you to pull the trigger because he's playing the exact same character.
Han Solo over and over again.
He's playing Han Solo, and to add insult to injury, The Electric State sets him up with this supposedly killer intro that's clearly modeled on Jack Burton in Big Trouble in Little China, and I was like, you do not want to bring that comparison to yourself. Because you're just going to crash and burn, and that's what happens. Millie Bobby Brown is, she does what she can. She's a Netflix darling. She knows what she's in. She's done the Stranger Things stuff. She's done the Enola Holmes stuff. She knows that she's making this movie for people to watch while they do laundry in the background. But you really feel that second screen experience where you have people literally saying out loud what they are doing at the moment they're doing it because they know people aren't looking at the screen. And I just got... I wasn't even passionate enough about it to get mad. It's sort of like when your parents say, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. This is just, what are we doing this for? And if nothing else, it totally explains why the Russos went running back to Marvel with their tail between their legs. I think they know this is garbage.
Yeah.
And they know
I think this
that,
is a real, solidification of, these guys are not Spielberg or James Cameron. They're TV guys
or James Gunn.
Yeah. I mean, and I the thing that they were good at was working within a sandbox, on shows like Community and Arrested Development, and that's what made them kind of, for from a business standpoint, a really smart fit for Marvel of
they're middle managers.
Yeah.
They're middle managers who are really good at executing somebody else's vision.
Yeah, and then, we've gotten 3 movies in a row of all right, you guys are some of the biggest blockbuster filmmakers of all time, to which they still seem to kind of have a stick up their butt about in interviews of I can't believe that we were not nominated for Best Director for Avengers Endgame or something, being guys, you're fine, just chill out. They're
it's the Mad Men meme. It's that's what the money's for.
Yes. But they've gotten 3 movies in a row in which I've kind of been these guys are kind of these guys are journeymen, like Cherry, the Gray Man, and this all in a row being I'm sorry, these are guys who are clearly they are good professionals. They are they know different cool tricks and stuff to do with cameras and stuff, but they're not visionary auteurs, and we need to give up on that.
Yeah, I think it explains, like, I think when you look at their track record, you look at the comments they've been making in interviews, I think this fully explains why they're so gung-ho on AI.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, this thing can do what we do, and we don't have to work as hard? Like, and then I think what they were planning to do was spring on everybody with the Electric State, like, see, we used AI and it was fine. And you're like, no, you used AI to make Kurt Loder feel younger, and you put Bill Clinton in your movie for God knows whatever reason. It shows you how asinine AI is.
Okay, so I'm gonna get us off the.
I got nothing on the Electric State. It sounds like a disaster.
we've already given the Electric State too much time. All right, some things some other headlines from this past week I wanted to get you guys' opinions on. Within the last 24 hours, there's a very hot project moving around Hollywood. It is a reboot of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre with Glenn Powell starring, and I'm gonna look up who's directing. It's another like big director. Oh, it's the guy who made Strange Darling, that movie from last year. So him directing, Glenn Powell starring, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We're gonna try once again for the umpteenth time to reboot this iconic horror franchise. What are you guys' thoughts?
You tell me Glenn Powell and the director who made Strange Darlings, and I'm like, that sounds great. Texas Chainsaw Massacre doesn't particularly inspire me all that much. I mean,
yeah, that's
to me, horror is the easiest genre to do something new.
Yeah.
Like, people understand what they're okay. It's a horror movie. I'm going to be scared. There's going to be blood and it's going to be terrifying. Why do I need to do that in a way that is predictable because I'm remaking something? Why do I need to do that with sort of a already established character?
Yeah.
I don't get that. Just tell me that the two of them are making a horror movie, and I'm perfectly happy with it.
Yeah, if they want to make something in the vein of Texas Chainsaw, something like when Ty West made X a few years ago, and in that kind of grungy grindhouse zone. But like, yeah, I agree, Jason. As exciting as like both of those two people are together, it does make me a little worried about Glenn Powell. Of like, all of his stuff seems to be plugging in the franchises, and I don't want him to go the Chris Pratt route because he's such a special asset as a movie star. But also, just like Texas Chainsaw Massacre is like a lightning in a bottle bit of movie alchemy that just like even that series itself has never been able to replicate. Just the the horrid grunginess and kind of like, I don't know. I think I've talked about it on this show before of just like that movie feeling like a tape that you found in your grandparents' like attic that like you should be like, do I need to contact the police? This is upsetting.
That's what I was going to say is like, they're treating it like a Freddy or a Jason or a Ghostface when it's always been more of like a one and done kind of Blair Witch thing. Like what makes Texas Chainsaw Massacre work is you don't know who any of these people are. It's shot for $10. And yeah, it's like you said, it feels like a snuff film. Like, it feels like, oh my God, I need to take a shower after I watch this. You're not going to get that with Hangman from Top Gun. Like, and I love Glenn Powell. That's
a good energy that, like, I don't know that I'm kind of done with that in horror movies. I'm kind of done with the, like, let's wink and be, like, a little, like, smarmy about the movie that we're in.
Well, and they did that with Texas Chainsaw 2. They did that with Texas Chainsaw.
They've already remade Texas Chainsaw Massacre twice, I think.
Yeah.
They made a Texas Chainsaw movie with Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger. Granted, they weren't famous, but you've got star power now. It's like, it's not that kind of franchise. And if you're just going for name recognition, you're already starting off on the wrong foot. Because the people that are going to recognize the name Texas Chainsaw Massacre are going to be people who aren't going to see it if it's got Glenn Powell in it.
Yeah, exactly. That's I don't, why are you doing this the star thing? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll be fine, but
we'll see. Okay. One of the last things I want to ask you guys. There's been a lot of James Bond news, speaking of franchises, over the last few weeks, with Amazon paying exuberant amounts of money to the Broccoli family invest in their broccoli stocks and to give the James Bond franchise over to Amazon. Now it's been announced that producers Amy Pascal and David Hyman are in talks to produce the next Bond movie. There's been all kinds of little, like this director may be attached and this actor. All I want to know from you guys is what would be the James Bond package of like director and star that you can even say like have this person as a villain too. Like who would be the package that would be I'm super excited. I'm back on the train cuz I'm a little bit like all right, this might be the end of like not that James Bond was like this crown jewel, but like that montage at the Academy Awards did kind of feel like a little bit of like RIP to James Bond. You're going to become basically like toilet paper for Amazon right now.
Yeah, it's like they crammed it into the in memoriam section and just made that longer.
Right, exactly. An in memoriam for James Bond. But what would be the James Bond package that you would be most excited to see?
I'll go first, just because mine's really quick. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Well, I was going to say, my answer is I don't know, because most of the successful James Bonds have not been. Daniel Craig wasn't an established star.
No.
Even Sean Connery, but Sean Connery wasn't a huge star when he made James. Roger Moore wasn't a big star. Pierce Brosnan is the only one who was sort of well known. Timothy Dalton wasn't well known. So James Bond usually goes to someone that we don't know. So picking a name to me, like everyone's like, oh, Idris Elba, Regé Jean Page, there are a bunch of names that have been out there the past few years who are wonderful actors and very charismatic. And I'm like, yeah, I could see that. But I think there's almost something wonderful about James Bond being, if not a nobody, someone who's not really well known. So that's my take. And in terms of director and the such, I don't know. There are too many names out there. Give me Christopher Nolan.
Well, I think we're at a place where the only reason that we're still doing James Bond movies is because money. And I know that sounds like a really simple answer, but like I feel like the world we're living in now, there's not room for James Bond. You either have to make him so dark that he sort of outdarks Daniel Craig, which
I hope we don't do that
was, right? Or you have to set it in a world where it's, so over the top and parody that he's practically Austin Powers, because you can't I was going to say Austin Powers. You can't put James Bond in the current climate without just making the movie ultra bleak. These are not fun spy romps anymore when the world is on fire. Like in the modern era, James Bond does not have American allies. Like in the modern era, like maybe that's your story, but Jeff Bezos is not going to tell that story. Like it's where does James Bond go when all of his resources from like countries with more access have turned their backs on the free world? That's an interesting story. I don't think your average James Bond fan wants to see that. So what are you left with? You're left with Black Bag. Like, we got a good James Bond movie this year. It's Black Bag.
Yeah. I do think it would
and it has Regé Jean Page in it.
Yeah. I do think I'm maybe a little bit more kind of in Jason's pool of like, let's discover an unknown. We don't need like someone who, is already an established star to kind of jump into this. I don't even need Christopher Nolan. Let's just get a good journeyman director doing this. I think that almost killed the Craig movies, is like those getting maybe like a little bit pretentious in some places. And yeah, let's just bring this back to being kind of like, it's a fun action franchise. It's globetrotting. We can do it at a smaller budget. I don't think Amazon will do that. I think they'll try and make it an event thing. But, let's take it back to a bit of, I don't know, just a bit of fun, but also not turning into that Fast and Furious thing of like, this is so ridiculous that it almost like is boiling over into laziness.
Yeah, so the thing I would say is, first of all, I'm a huge James Bond fan. I own oh God, like 20 plus James Bond movies on DVD.
Do you have the massive box set that I used to always see at?
Yep.
I do.
Yep. Yeah, and I watched them multiple times. I've seen every James Bond film, 5+ times probably. So, Josh, I would push back on it. Oh, do we need James Bond? Yeah, it's a fun.
It's an institution.
It's a fun series. Well, it's a fun series of movies. It's a fun character that people can relate to and already understand a lot of things about. And frankly, the Craig movies, with maybe one or two exceptions, have been really, really good, with some very smart directing, really good casting of villains and things like that. I love where the franchise has been in recent years. It almost kind of got supplanted, I think, for a little while by Mission Impossible. They're very similar kind of films.
And Mission Impossible has the sense of fun that I feel like the Bond movies kind of abandoned for a little bit. Especially when you get into like Spectre, which I remember when I rewatched that a couple years ago before the last Craig movie, because I didn't remember anything that happened in it, and I was like, this is, guys, it's not the Conformist. Bad. This is James Bond. We've gone a little up our ass here.
Yeah, the Daniel Craig Bonds, I think, got a little spooked from the Bourne movies. I think that they came around and they were like, oh, Bourne is trying to kind of steal our thunder a little bit. And I feel like you had those two franchises competing a little bit for a while.
Mm-hmm. Also, Netflix might buy Bourne, so you might be getting more Bourne movies.
I feel like, James Bond, let's get back to the fun gadgets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I feel like the Craig movies have gotten away from that a little bit. Mission Impossible does a good job with the gadgets.
Yeah.
So get back to the gadgets. A charismatic, sexy Bond who can also beat the crap out of a guy in an alleyway. That's what we need. And go have some fun with it. Spy. We frankly, to me, we don't get enough spy movies. We've talked about Black Bag endlessly. Give me more Black Bag.
Yeah.
Spy movies are good and they're interesting. And despite the fact that we are in a very difficult, tumultuous political climate internationally, you can find spy stories in there.
That's
it doesn't have to always
climate to have spy stories.
That's true.
It doesn't always have to be we're saving the world in every single movie.
Yeah.
And so if you're not
the early
doing
Connery ones are not like that. Like From Russia with Love is not a save the world thing. It's more of a it's closer to like a John le Carré novel of spycraft in nations like snooping on each other and trying to pass things off from the other one.
I feel like the uncertainty in the world on the global stage, the uncertain allies and things like that, makes a more rich environment for a potential spy story.
That's true. Yeah.
Of shifting alliances and that kind of stuff. I mean, that it's there. Just do it smartly, Amazon, please.
And it's not like and the thing about the Bond movies, and I know Jason is, I think, a bigger fan of them than I am. I don't dislike the Bond movies by any stretch, but I think you can even look within the franchise's history of a ton of what to do and what not to do. Because, we talk about the Bond movies in this hushed, reverent tone. Bond's got a lot of stinkers. Man, every Bond made some bad Bond movies. So it's not like the track record. It's not like you're messing with an untouchable track record.
Right. Everyone has at least one stinker under their belt. Even Craig and Connery, for as much as people. The one person who may not have a stinker is George Lazenby,
baby.
Because he was only in one movie, and that one rocks.
So yeah, you can look at the history. You can figure out how can we update this for a new era, which is, maybe tough, who knows, but I think there is grounds here to try some things that will, yes, honor the legacy, but also say, hey, remember these used to be fun.
Yeah. Well, guys, we're almost approaching an hour, so it's probably time for us to wrap up. How do you think? How do you feel about the state of the world in the industry after our little conversation? You
I think we solved it, guys. We're good.
We solved all the issues. Gonna send this in a file over to David Zaslav and Walt Disney.
We did not solve anything, and the industry is in real trouble. The biggest sign the industry is in trouble is that everyone looks at the Bong Joon-ho movie, which cost $110 million, and Alto Nights, which cost 40 or 50 million. You know, they look at Warner Brothers, they go, oh, wow, Warner Brothers is in huge trouble with these movies. And then they look at The Electric State, which cost $320 million, and they go, Netflix is doing perfectly fine. That's a huge problem for the industry.
Yeah.
Well, what a inspiring way to leave us off at.
On
guys,
that note,
yeah, we'll catch you another time, and for all of our listeners out there, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all of your devices, and we'll catch you next week.